She told me I was the only one, that she'd never felt safe until me. I paid for her debts, her dreams, her future. Turns out, I was just the backup plan, the one she leaned on until her real life was ready. And the night I found out, I couldn't even cry. I just stared at the phone, knowing I'd never hear her voice again. A couple nights ago, I got an email from a guy who's been watching this channel for a long time, since before I even had a proper intro on my videos. He said, "I didn't think I'd ever be the guy watching these stories. I thought I was smarter. But now, I can't even recognize who I became trying to hold on to her." I just sat there for a while after reading that. I didn't even respond right away, because what he said, it echoed in a place I thought had already gone quiet. That part of me that still wonders if it was ever real, if maybe I was just someone she needed for a season, and when that season ended, so did I. It's a strange kind of grief. When someone walks away and takes your sense of self with them, you stop trusting your own memories. You replay conversations, trying to catch the moment the lie began. If you're watching this, and something in this story feels familiar, hit that like button, leave a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and if you've been here before, if you've followed this channel through all the heartbreak, honesty, and hard lessons, thank you. Honestly, super thank you. You've helped create a space where truth doesn't feel so heavy. We're not alone in this. That's something I'm starting to believe again. And maybe, just maybe, sharing the story helps lift the weight. Let me take you back to where it all started. I can still feel her fingers wrapping around mine at that beachside restaurant in Hua Hin. The candles flickered between us, casting shadows across her face, and when she looked up at me with those dark eyes, she said something that changed everything. "You're different from the others, Frank." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "The other men who come here, they just want something quick. But you see me." I squeezed her hand tighter, feeling something I hadn't felt in 20 years of marriage that ended in silence and separate bedrooms. This was real. This was destiny. 18 months I'd been retired from the long-haul routes. 18 months of sitting in my cabin in Montana watching snow pile up, while my ex-wife took half of everything I'd worked for. The cold wasn't just outside anymore. It had settled into my bones, into the spaces where hope used to live. That's when I decided Thailand might give me something Montana never could. Warmth, peace, maybe even companionship. I wasn't looking for love when I checked into that resort in Hua Hin. I was just looking for a reason to wake up in the morning. Then I met Malay at the front desk. She wasn't just beautiful, though God knows she was. With her long black hair and the way she moved like water, she was kind. Really kind. When other guests snapped at her for things that weren't her fault, she'd just smile and fix whatever needed fixing. But when she looked at me, something shifted in her expression. Like she was actually seeing me, not just another lonely Farang with a wallet full of baht. "You don't seem like the others," she told me that first week when I asked her to recommend a restaurant. "Most of them, they just want to know where to find girls. But you ask about the temple, about the history. You want to understand this place." I felt proud of that. Proud that she noticed. Proud that maybe, at 63, I could still be seen as something more than just another old fool running from his failures. The night she took my hand, we'd been talking for 2 hours straight. I'd told her about the highways I'd driven, the sunrises over Nebraska cornfields, the way the engine of a Peterbilt sounds when you're climbing through the Rockies at dawn. She told me about growing up in a village north of Bangkok, about dreams of studying in America, about feeling trapped between what her family expected and what her heart wanted. "I never tell anyone these things," she said, her thumb tracing circles on my knuckles. "But with you, it feels safe." Safe. That word hit me harder than I expected. My ex-wife used to say I was predictable, boring, too focused on the road to notice what was happening at home. But Malay made predictable sound like a gift. "You're stable, Frank. You're not going to disappear tomorrow, or promise me things you don't mean. I can feel it. When she said that, something cracked open in my chest. All those years of feeling like I wasn't enough, like I was just the guy who paid the bills while life happened around me, all of that started to fade. The waves were crashing just 20 feet from our table, and the warm Thai breeze carried the scent of jasmine and grilled fish. This was paradise, and I was sharing it with someone who actually wanted to know what I thought about things. Not just where I'd been or how much money I had, but what I believed, what I feared, what I hoped for in whatever years I had left. "You have kind eyes," she said, still holding my hand. "My grandmother always told me to look at the eyes. They don't lie like words do." I wanted to kiss her right then, but something told me to wait. This wasn't about taking something from her. This was about giving her something she'd never had: safety, stability, someone who wouldn't hurt her or leave her or treat her like she was disposable. "Malay," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "I don't know what this is, but I know I don't want it to end when my vacation's over." She smiled then, really smiled, not the polite customer service expression she wore at the resort. "Then don't let it end," she said simply. That night, walking her back to her motorbike in the hotel parking lot, she stopped and turned to face me. "Frank, I need you to know something. I don't trust easily. Too many people have hurt me. But you feel different. Like maybe I could let myself believe in something good again." She kissed my cheek, soft and quick, then climbed onto her bike. As she drove away, her headlight disappearing into the humid darkness, I stood there feeling like I'd been handed a second chance at everything I'd thought was over. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my hotel bed listening to the ocean and replaying every word she'd said, every look that passed between us. For the first time since my divorce, for the first time in maybe 10 years, I felt like I mattered to someone, not because of what I could provide or what I could fix, but because of who I was. Frank Morrison, 63 years old, finally worth loving again. The thought should have scared me. Instead, it felt like coming home. "My father used to drink," Molly told me 3 weeks later, curled up on my hotel room couch with her feet tucked under her. "Every night after work, he'd come home angry. My mother would hide us in the bedroom when we heard his motorbike." Her voice stayed steady, but I could see her fingers trembling around her coffee cup. I wanted to reach for her, but something told me to just listen. "When I was 16, he sold my bicycle to buy whiskey. It was the only thing that was really mine." I'd never seen her like this before. Vulnerable, raw, trusting me with pieces of herself that probably still bled when she touched them. We'd been meeting every few days since that night at the beach restaurant, usually for dinner or coffee, sometimes just walking along the shore while she told me about her day at the resort. But this was different. This was her letting me see behind the gentle smile she wore like armor. "The men who come here," she continued, staring down into her cup, "they think we're all the same, easy, grateful for attention. They don't see that we have families to take care of, dreams that have nothing to do with them. They see what they want to see." She looked up at me then, and I felt something shift in my chest. "But you asked me about my mother's garden. You remembered that I'm saving money for computer classes. You see me, Frank. The real me." I did see her. God help me, I saw her more clearly than I'd ever seen anyone. The way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking, how she always ordered the same thing at restaurants, pad thai, not too spicy but pretended to consider the menu. The fact that she sent half her salary home to her village every month, keeping barely enough for herself. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was good. Genuinely, completely good in a way that made me want to be better just by being near her. "You don't have to tell me these things," I said, finally setting down my own cup and moving closer to her on the couch. "I know it's hard to talk about." She shook her head, that long black hair falling across her face. "I want to tell you. I've never wanted to tell anyone before. But with you, it doesn't hurt the same way. Like maybe those things happened to someone else, and now I'm safe enough to remember them." Safe. There was that word again. It wrapped around my heart like a fist, squeezing until I could barely breathe. My ex-wife had never called me safe. She'd called me absent, distracted, emotionally unavailable. But Male saw something in me that even I hadn't known was there, the ability to be a shelter for someone who'd spent her whole life in the storm. "I don't want you to go back to America," she said suddenly, so quietly I almost missed it. "I know you have to eventually, but I keep pretending you'll just stay here forever. Is that stupid?" The hope in her voice nearly broke me. Here was this incredible woman, young enough to be my daughter, telling me she wanted me to stay. Not for what I could give her, not for the security or the money, but because she'd found something with me that she'd never had before. "It's not stupid," I told her, reaching out to brush that fallen hair away from her face. "I've been thinking the same thing. Montana's got nothing for me now except memories I'd rather forget. But here I have you." She leaned into my touch. Closing her eyes like my hand on her cheek was the most natural thing in the world. "Really?" she whispered. "You'd really stay? For me?" That's when I knew I was in trouble. Not the good kind of trouble, the kind that makes your heart race and your palms sweat, the dangerous kind. The kind that makes you ignore the voice in your head asking why a 28-year-old woman would want to build a life with a man old enough to be her father. But her eyes were so earnest, so full of something that looked like love, that I pushed that voice away. "I'd stay," I said, and meant it. "I'd stay as long as you wanted me here." She kissed me then, soft and hesitant at first, then deeper when I didn't pull away. It was the first time I'd kissed anyone since the divorce, and it felt like waking up from a long gray dream. When we finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine. "I've never felt safe with anyone before," she whispered. "But with you, I feel like I can breathe." The next weekend, she came to my apartment, the little place I'd rented month to month near the beach. She said she needed to get away from the resort, from the constant demands of tourists and her boss's wandering eyes. I cooked dinner, badly, and she laughed at my attempts to use chopsticks with spaghetti. We watched a Thai movie with English subtitles, her head on my shoulder, my arm around her waist like we'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. "This is what I want," she said during a quiet moment in the film. "Just this. Someone who cares enough to try to cook for me, even if they're terrible at it. Someone who doesn't need me to be anything except myself." I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, something floral and sweet that reminded me of the jasmine growing outside my bedroom window. "You never have to be anything but yourself with me," I promised her, and I meant it. Even as part of me wondered what she was running from, what had driven her to seek safety in the arms of a man twice her age, I pushed those doubts aside. She was here. She was real. She was choosing me. After 43 years of feeling like I was never quite enough for anyone, that had to be enough. She stayed that night, curled up against me in my narrow bed, her breathing soft, and even while I lay awake listening to the ocean and trying to convince myself that this wasn't too good to be true. In the morning, she made coffee the Thai way, strong and sweet, and sat cross-legged on my kitchen counter while she told me about her plans to take computer classes in Bangkok someday. "Maybe we could go together," I suggested, and her face lit up like I'd offered her the world. Maybe I had. Maybe we were offering each other the world, one careful piece at a time. That's what I told myself anyway, as I watched her get ready to leave for her shift at the resort. That's what I chose to believe. "Frank, I'm so sorry to ask this, but my mother, she's in the hospital." Molly's voice was shaky on the phone, thick with tears I could almost see through the connection. "The doctors, they want 20,000 baht before they'll do the surgery. I know it's a lot of money, but I don't have anyone else to ask." It was a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after she'd first taken my hand at that beachside restaurant, and I was drinking coffee on my balcony, watching fishing boats head out into the Gulf of Thailand. "Don't apologize," I said immediately, already reaching for my wallet. "Your mother needs help. That's what matters." I could hear her crying harder now, that soft, broken sound that made something twist in my gut. "You don't understand how much this means to me, Frank. No one has ever I mean, my own family barely helps each other, but you, she trailed off, and I filled the silence with certainty. I'll transfer it this morning. Give me your bank details. An hour later, I was standing at the ATM outside the 7-Eleven near my apartment, punching in numbers and watching 20,000 baht disappear from my account. It didn't hurt. Not financially. I had my pension, my savings from 25 years of driving truck, the settlement from selling the house in Montana. But something else nagged at me as I walked home. Not suspicion, exactly. More like the feeling you get when you're driving in fog and can't quite see what's ahead of you. She called that evening, voice bright with relief. The surgery went perfectly. The doctors say she'll be home in 3 days. Frank, you saved her life. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. The gratitude in her voice should have felt good. It should have made me feel like the hero she was painting me as. Instead, it made me feel strangely hollow. You don't need to repay me, I told her. That's not why I did it. But even as I said the words, I wondered what exactly I had done it for. The next week, it was her friend Niran who needed help. She's like a sister to me, Molly explained as we sat in a coffee shop near the resort. Her boyfriend left her with all these debts, and now her landlord is threatening to throw her out. She's got nowhere else to go, Frank. And she has a little boy. Molly's eyes were wide and earnest, her hand reaching across the table to cover mine. I know I just asked for help with my mother, and I hate that I'm asking again, but how much? I interrupted, not because I was eager to give money away, but because I couldn't stand the look of desperate hope on her face. 15,000 baht, she said. For rent and deposits and getting her friend back on her feet. I nodded and reached for my phone to transfer the money, ignoring the voice in my head that was asking why Molly's problems seemed to have price tags attached to them. But that weekend, when I asked her to spend both Saturday and Sunday with me, she shook her head with that apologetic smile that was becoming familiar. I'm so sorry, Frank. I have to work extra shifts to make up for all the time I took off when my mother was sick. Maybe just Saturday evening? I wanted to point out that she'd just received enough money to cover her mother's surgery, that maybe she didn't need to work quite so many extra shifts. Instead, I nodded and told her I understood. Saturday evening came and went. She texted around 7, had to stay late. Tourist emergency, would make it up to me. I sat in my apartment eating leftover pad see ew and watching Thai television, trying not to count how many promises she'd made and how many she'd kept. The math wasn't adding up the way I wanted it to. You're being paranoid, I told myself as I got ready for bed. She's working hard. She's supporting her family. She's dealing with things you can't even imagine. But the hollow feeling in my chest was growing, spreading like a stain I couldn't wash out. When I'd been married, Linda used to say I was too trusting, too willing to believe what people told me instead of watching what they actually did. Maybe she'd been right. Sunday morning, Maylee called bright and early. Good morning, my handsome man, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I missed you so much yesterday. Can we have lunch together? I want to make up for disappointing you. The way she said it, my handsome man should have melted away all my doubts. Instead, it made me notice that she'd never actually called me her boyfriend, or talked about our relationship in any concrete terms. She called me handsome, wonderful, different from the others, but never hers. At lunch, she was everything I'd fallen for: attentive, sweet, asking about my morning and telling me funny stories about difficult guests at the resort. When the check came, I reached for it automatically, the way I always did. Thank you, Frank, she said, squeezing my hand. You're so good to me. I don't know what I did to deserve someone like you. But as she said it, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it quickly, then flipped it face down. Not before I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. Boss. Work? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She nodded, but something flickered across her face just for a second, so fast I almost missed it. Guilt? Fear? Always something, she said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was, actually. I'd never saved my boss's number with a heart emoji, but I smiled and nodded like it made perfect sense. That night, lying in bed alone again, I stared at the ceiling and tried to add up everything that had happened in the past month. The money I'd given her, the dates she'd canceled, the phone calls that always seemed to come when she needed something, the way she'd started saying we when talking about the future but never seemed to have time for us in the present. I was being paranoid, I told myself. She was young, she was busy, she was dealing with family crisis after family crisis. These things happened. The fact that they all seemed to require my financial intervention was just coincidence. Bad luck. The kind of problems that follow some people around like storms. But deep down, in the part of my brain that had kept me alive through 40 years of driving 18-wheelers through blizzards and around drunk drivers, a little red light was starting to flash. Something wasn't right. I just wasn't ready to admit what that something might be. The message appeared while she was in the shower. I wasn't trying to look, I was just reaching across the nightstand for my reading glasses when her phone lit up on the pillow next to me, vibrating with that soft buzz that had become part of the soundtrack of our evenings together. The name on the screen stopped me cold. Boss, followed by a preview of the message that made my stomach drop. Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful. I stared at those words like they were written in a language I didn't understand. Boss, with a heart emoji. Texting her at 9:30 on a Sunday night, calling her beautiful, talking about seeing her tonight. Tonight, when she was here with me, when she'd been here for the past 3 hours, when we'd just finished making love, and she'd whispered in my ear that she'd never felt closer to anyone in her life. The shower was still running. Steam was seeping out from under the bathroom door, and I could hear her humming something soft and off-key, the way she did when she was happy. She sounded happy. She sounded like a woman who'd just spent the evening with someone she cared about, not like someone who was planning to meet her boss after she left my apartment. Not like someone who was living some kind of double life. But there it was, glowing on the screen of her phone. Proof that I didn't know her as well as I thought I did. Proof that maybe I didn't know her at all. The water stopped. I heard the shower door slide open, heard her feet on the bathroom tiles. I should have looked away. Should have pretended I hadn't seen anything, given her the chance to explain. Trusted the woman who'd spent the last 2 months convincing me that I was different from all the other men she'd known. Instead, I kept staring at that phone, watching the screen fade to black just as the bathroom door opened. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, and I realized my face must have given me away. She was wrapped in my towel, her hair dripping wet, looking exactly like what she was supposed to be. My girlfriend, coming out of my shower, about to climb back into my bed. Not someone with secrets. Not someone with a boss who called her beautiful and made plans to see her late at night. "Your phone," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "You got a message from your boss." I watched her face carefully, looking for something: guilt, surprise, fear. What I saw instead was something that might have been relief, followed quickly by annoyance. "Frank, were you reading my messages?" She crossed to the nightstand and picked up the phone, checking the screen with the casual confidence of someone who had nothing to hide. "I wasn't reading anything," I said, sitting up in bed. "It just lit up." I couldn't help seeing it. She scrolled through something on the phone, frowning slightly, then set it back down. "It's just about tomorrow's schedule. We have a big group checking in, and he wants to make sure everyone knows what they're supposed to do." Her explanation sounded reasonable, professional. Exactly what you'd expect from a dedicated employee who took her job seriously. But bosses don't call their employees beautiful. Bosses don't send scheduling messages with heart emojis. At least, not in my world. Not in any world I understood. "He calls you beautiful in work messages?" I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. She was toweling off her hair now, her back to me, and I couldn't see her expression. "Thai bosses are different from American bosses," she said with a laugh that sounded forced. "They're more friendly, more personal. it doesn't mean anything. Maybe that was true. Maybe I was applying Montana standards to a Thai situation, reading American jealousy into Southeast Asian business practices. Maybe the heart emoji was just how people communicated here, the same way everyone seemed to add KA to the end of every sentence and smile even when they were frustrated. Maybe I was being exactly what Linda had always accused me of being: paranoid, possessive, unable to trust. But when Malie climbed back into bed next to me, when she curled up against my chest and started tracing patterns on my skin with her fingertip, something had changed. Not in her, she seemed exactly the same, warm and affectionate and present. The change was in me. A door had opened in my mind, just a crack, and doubt was seeping through like smoke. "Frank," she said softly, her voice muffled against my shoulder, "you believe me, don't you? About the message?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to wrap my arms around her and forget I'd ever seen that phone light up. I wanted to go back to 5 minutes ago, when the biggest concern in my life was whether I'd remembered to set my alarm for the morning. "Of course I believe you," I said, because what else could I say? Because I loved her, or thought I did, and love was supposed to mean trust. Because I was 63 years old and she was 28, and if I started questioning every interaction she had with other people, where would it end? "I'm sorry for being paranoid. It's just, I care about you. Maybe too much." She lifted her head to look at me, her eyes soft in the dim light from the bedside lamp. "You can never care too much, Frank. That's what makes you different. That's what makes this real." She kissed me then, slow and sweet, and I kissed her back because I wanted it to be real. Because I needed it to be real. Because the alternative that I'd been fooling myself for 2 months, that the best thing to happen to me in 20 years was just another elaborate lie, was too much to consider. But after she fell asleep, I lay awake listening to her breathe and thinking about that message, about the heart emoji and the word beautiful and the casual way she'd explained it away, about how quickly she'd grabbed the phone, how she'd checked it before giving me her explanation, about the fact that in all our conversations about her job, she'd never mentioned having the kind of boss who sent late-night texts about anything. In the morning, she left early. Had to open the resort, she said. Big day ahead. She kissed me goodbye at the door, told me she'd call later, disappeared into the humid Thai dawn on her motorbike like she did every morning. I watched her taillights fade into traffic and wondered if I was watching her drive to work or to whatever was waiting for her in that message I'd seen. I spent the day trying not to think about it. Went to the market, bought groceries I didn't need, walked on the beach, swam in the warm Gulf water, read a book I couldn't concentrate on. But every time my phone rang, every time I saw a couple walking hand in hand on the sand, every time I passed the resort where she worked, that message came back to me. "Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful." Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Maybe I was losing my mind, or maybe I was finally starting to see clearly. Either way, something had shifted. The ground I'd been standing on for the past 2 months had developed a crack, and I could feel it spreading beneath my feet. I planned everything perfectly. The little restaurant where we'd had our first real date, the one overlooking the water where she'd told me I was different from the others. Orchids her favorite flower, the delicate purple one she'd pointed out at the weekend market and said reminded her of her grandmother's garden. And the ring. Not an engagement ring. Nothing that would scare her away, just a simple silver band with a small sapphire that matched her eyes. Something to show her she mattered. Something to show her I was serious about building a future together. 7 o'clock, she'd said when I asked her to dinner 2 days before. "I can't wait, Frank. It feels like forever, since we've had a whole evening just for us." The excitement in her voice had erased every doubt that had been building since the night I saw that message on her phone. This was what real looked like. A woman eager to celebrate her birthday with the man she cared about. A woman who saw our time together as precious, not just convenient. I got to the restaurant at 6:30, wanted everything to be perfect when she arrived. The table by the window, the one where we could watch the sunset paint the water gold and pink. The orchids arranged just so, casual but thoughtful. The ring box hidden in my jacket pocket, waiting for the right moment. Maybe after dinner, maybe during the walk on the beach I'd planned afterward. I'd know when the time was right. 7 o'clock came and went. The waiter asked if I wanted to order drinks, if I was waiting for someone, if everything was all right. "She's just running late," I told him, checking my phone for the third time in 5 minutes. Work probably kept her longer than expected. But Malay was never late. In 2 months of dating, she'd been exactly on time for every date, every meeting, every moment we'd planned together. Punctuality was one of the things I'd noticed about her right away. The way she respected other people's time, the way she kept her promises. 7:30. I texted her, "Hey beautiful, everything okay? I'm at the restaurant waiting for you." The message showed as delivered, but not read. I ordered a beer, then another one, watching the sunset I'd wanted to share with her fade into ordinary darkness. The orchids sat in their vase like accusations, too bright and hopeful for the growing pit in my stomach. 8 o'clock. "Malay, I'm getting worried. Please call me when you get this." Still delivered, but not read. The waiter was looking at me with the kind of pity reserved for people who'd been stood up, and I wanted to tell him he was wrong. This wasn't what it looked like. Molly wouldn't do this to me. Not on her birthday. Not when we'd been planning this for days. 8:30. I called the resort, asked if she was working. "Malay?" the night clerk said in broken English. "She no work today. Birthday, she say. No work." I hung up and stared at my phone, trying to make sense of what I'd just learned. She wasn't at work. She'd told them it was her birthday. So where was she? 9 o'clock. I paid for the beers I'd barely touched and drove to her apartment building, the little complex near the night market where she rented a studio on the 3rd floor. Her motorbike wasn't in the parking area. Her windows were dark. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching and waiting and trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Family emergency. Dead phone battery. Some crisis that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the complicated life she led when we weren't together. But even as I told myself these things, I was opening Facebook on my phone. I'd never checked her social media before. It felt like spying, like a violation of the trust we'd built. But sitting in that parking lot, surrounded by the sound of night vendors and motorbike engines and my own growing panic, trust seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford. Her profile loaded slowly on my phone's connection. The most recent post was from 3 hours ago, a selfie in a crowded club I didn't recognize, lights flashing behind her, her arm around someone I'd never seen before. A young Thai guy with perfect teeth and styled hair, wearing the kind of clothes that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. They looked happy. They looked intimate. They looked like they belonged together in a way that made my chest feel like it was caving in. The caption was in Thai, but I didn't need to translate it to understand what I was seeing. The timestamp showed it had been posted at 6:15, 15 minutes before she was supposed to meet me for dinner. While I was arranging orchids and checking my watch and believing in something that had never been real, I screenshot the photo before I could stop myself, like evidence I might need later, then immediately felt sick for doing it. But the image was burned into my brain anyway. Molly, beautiful and laughing, celebrating her birthday with someone who wasn't me, someone she'd chosen over the dinner we'd planned, the ring in my pocket, the future I'd been stupid enough to think we were building together. "Why did you lie?" I typed, my fingers shaking as I switched back to our text conversation. I stared at the message for a full minute before hitting send, knowing it would change everything between us, knowing I couldn't take it back once it was out there. But the alternative, pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen, going home and waiting for her to call with some elaborate excuse, felt impossible. The message showed as delivered. Then, a few minutes later, as read, but no response came. I waited until midnight, parked outside her empty apartment, watching my phone screen like it might spontaneously generate the explanation I desperately wanted. Nothing. I drove home through empty streets, past the restaurant where I'd sat alone for 2.5 hours, past the beach where we'd walked hand in hand and talked about the future, The orchids were still in my passenger seat, wilted now from the heat. The ring box felt like a weight in my pocket, a reminder of how badly I'd misjudged everything. Back in my apartment, I opened a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving for a special occasion and sat on my balcony, looking out at the dark water of the Gulf. My phone sat silent on the table next to me. No missed calls, no messages, no acknowledgement that I existed at all. I thought about Linda, about the way our marriage had ended, not with a fight or a betrayal, but with a slow fade into indifference. At least she'd had the decency to tell me it was over. This felt worse somehow. This felt like I'd been erased, like the past 2 months had been nothing more than a performance that was now over. The woman who'd held my hand and called me different, who'd cried about her father and thanked me for making her feel safe, where was that woman while I sat alone on her birthday, surrounded by the wreckage of my own stupid hope? I finished the whiskey and went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photo again. Her arm around him, her smile bright and genuine in a way I'd thought was reserved for me. I'd been so convinced that what we had was special, that the age difference didn't matter because what we felt was real. But maybe the only thing that was real was my need to believe in something, anything, that could make me feel like I mattered again. The worst part wasn't the lying. It wasn't even the humiliation of sitting alone in that restaurant watching couples share dinners I'd thought would be ours. The worst part was the voice in my head that kept asking the question I didn't want to answer. If she could lie about this, what else had she been lying about? And if I'd been wrong about her, what did that say about my ability to judge anything at all? 3 days of silence. 3 days of staring at my phone, checking her social media, driving past her apartment building like some pathetic stalker. 3 days of replaying every conversation we'd ever had, looking for clues I'd missed, signs I'd ignored, moments when the mask might have slipped if I'd been paying attention instead of just feeling grateful that someone like her wanted someone like me. Then, on Thursday morning, she called. "Frank?" Her voice was small, tentative, thick with tears I could hear even through the phone connection. "Can we meet? Please? I need to explain everything." Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me wanted to tell her there was nothing to explain, that the photo I'd seen told me everything I needed to know. But the bigger part, the part that had been dying slowly for 3 days, jumped at the sound of her voice like a drowning man grabbing for a rope. "Where?" I said, hating how eager I sounded, how quickly I'd abandoned any pretense of dignity or self-respect. She suggested the coffee shop near the temple, the quiet one where tourists rarely went. Neutral ground, safe territory, the kind of place where people went to have difficult conversations without making a scene. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner booth with her back to the wall, a barely touched iced coffee sweating on the table in front of her. She looked smaller than I remembered, younger, like the confident woman I'd fallen for had been replaced by a scared girl who'd been caught doing something she shouldn't have. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears that looked genuine enough to make my chest ache. "Frank, I'm so sorry," she said before I'd even sat down. "I know what you must think of me. I know how it looked, but it wasn't what you think. I swear to you, it wasn't what you think." She reached across the table like she was going to take my hand, then seemed to think better of it and pulled back. Good thing, because I wasn't sure I could have handled her touch right then. Not when I was still so angry and confused and desperate for her to give me a reason to forgive her. "Then what was it?" I asked, my voice coming out colder than I'd intended. "Because what I think is that you stood me up on your birthday to go out with another man. What I think is that you lied to me about where you were going to be. What I think is that I've been an idiot for the past 2 months." The words came out in a rush, all the hurt and confusion I'd been carrying around for 3 days spilling over like water from a broken dam. She was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face in a way that made me want to comfort her, even as every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to walk away. "He's my cousin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Niran, the man in the photo. He's my cousin from Bangkok. He came to visit for my birthday, and I couldn't say no to family. You understand family, don't you, Frank? How complicated it can be. Cousin. The word hung in the air between us like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Cousin meant family obligation. Cousin meant innocent explanation. Cousin meant maybe I hadn't been as stupid as I thought. Your cousin, I repeated, wanting to believe it so badly that my hands were shaking. Why didn't you just tell me that? Why didn't you call and explain? Because I was ashamed, she said, wiping at her eyes with a napkin that was already soaked through. Because he's successful and handsome and everything my family thinks I should be looking for. And when he suggested going out, when he said he wanted to celebrate with me, I knew how it would look. I knew if you saw us together, you'd think. She trailed off, looking down at her hands. I was trying to protect you from getting hurt, and instead I hurt you worse. The explanation made sense. More than that, it made me feel like the jealous, insecure old man I'd been afraid I was becoming. Of course she had family. Of course they would want to see her on her birthday. Of course it would be complicated for her to navigate between her relationship with me and her obligations to them. I'd been so focused on my own hurt feelings that I hadn't considered what she might have been going through. You should have trusted me, I said, but there was less anger in my voice now. You should have told me the truth instead of just disappearing. She nodded, reaching across the table again. This time, I let her take my hand, let her fingers intertwine with mine like they had that first night at the beach restaurant. I know, she said. I was scared. My family, they don't understand about us, about why I would choose, why I would be with someone. She didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she meant. Someone my age. Someone so different from what they'd expect for her. I don't care what your family thinks, I said, and meant it. I care about what you think. I care about what we have together. Her grip on my hand tightened, and when she looked up at me, her eyes were bright with something that looked like relief. What we have is real, Frank. It's the most real thing in my life. I know I made a mistake, but please don't let one stupid mistake ruin everything we've built. Everything we'd built. 2 months of dinners and long walks and quiet mornings in my apartment. 2 months of feeling like I mattered to someone again, like I was worth loving despite my age and my past and all the ways I'd failed before. Was I really going to throw that away because of one misunderstanding? Because of one night when she'd chosen family over me? I missed you, I said, the admission coming out rougher than I'd intended. These past 3 days, I missed you so much I could barely function. I kept thinking about how it felt to lose you, and I realized I can't do it. I can't lose you, Malay. Not over this. She was crying again, but these were different tears. Happy tears, relief tears, the kind that came when something precious that had almost been lost was found again. You're not going to lose me, she promised, both hands holding mine now. I'm not going anywhere. I just need you to trust me, even when things get complicated. Even when my family doesn't understand. Can you do that for me? I nodded, feeling like I'd dodged a bullet I hadn't even seen coming. Trust. That's what relationships were built on, wasn't it? The willingness to believe in someone even when the evidence suggested you shouldn't. I can do that? I said. But no more disappearing. No more protecting me from things I need to know. If we're going to make this work, we have to be honest with each other. She agreed, promising transparency, promising communication, promising all the things I needed to hear to convince myself that this nightmare was over and we could go back to being happy together. That night, she came to my apartment. We made love with a desperation that felt like making up for lost time, like proving to each other that whatever had happened, we were still us. Afterward, she lay in my arms and talked about the future again, the computer classes she wanted to take, the trips we might go on together, the life we could build if we were brave enough to ignore what other people thought. I love you, Frank, she whispered against my chest as we drifted off to sleep. It was the first time either of us had said those words, and they hit me like a physical blow. Love. After everything that had happened, after all the doubt and fear and confusion, she loved me. And I loved her too, desperately, completely, in spite of every rational voice in my head that whispered I was being a fool. I should have listened to those voices. I should have asked more questions about her cousin, about why she'd chosen his birthday celebration over mine, about why she'd needed to keep our relationship secret from her family. I should have wondered why, if what we had was so real and so precious, she was so willing to sacrifice it to avoid an uncomfortable conversation with relatives. But I didn't ask those questions. I was too grateful to have her back, too relieved that the explanation wasn't as bad as I'd feared, too desperate to believe that love could really be this simple. So I held her close and listened to her breathe and told myself that this was what happiness felt like, that this was what it meant to trust someone completely. I should have known better. At 63, after a failed marriage and 25 years of seeing the worst of human nature from the cab of a truck, I should have known that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. But love makes fools of us all, regardless of age or experience or how many times we've been burned before. And I was already burning. I just didn't know it yet. "I got the job, Frank." Molly's voice was electric with excitement, crackling through my phone speaker as I sat on my balcony drinking my morning coffee. "The computer company in Bangkok, the one I've been dreaming about. They want me to start next month." I should have felt happy for her. This was what she'd been working toward, what she'd talked about during all those quiet evenings when she'd described her plans for the future. But all I felt was a cold sinking in my stomach, like watching something precious slip through my fingers. "That's wonderful," I managed, trying to match her enthusiasm. "You deserve it. You've worked so hard for this." And she had worked hard extra shifts at the resort, studying English on her own time, taking those basic computer courses at the community center in town. I'd watched her fall asleep over textbooks more nights than I could count, admired her determination to build something better for herself. "There's just one problem," she continued. And there it was, the catch I'd been waiting for without realizing it. They want a deposit for the training program and the uniform and the first month's accommodation. It's expensive, Frank. More expensive than I thought. She paused, and I could almost see her biting her lower lip the way she did when she was nervous. 100,000 baht. I know it's a lot, but this is my chance. My only chance to get out of here and make something of myself. 100,000 baht, 4 times what I'd given her for her mother's surgery, more money than most Thai people made in 6 months. I stared out at the Gulf of Thailand, watching fishing boats motor toward the horizon, and tried to calculate how much of my savings I'd already transferred to various crises in her life. The number was higher than I wanted to admit, even to myself. "That is a lot," I said carefully. "Are you sure this is legitimate? Companies don't usually ask for that kind of deposit up front." I wasn't trying to be difficult. I just heard stories about scams targeting young people desperate for opportunities, promises of jobs that didn't exist, and training programs that were nothing more than elaborate ways to separate hopeful victims from their money. "Frank, don't you trust me?" The hurt in her voice was immediate and sharp. "This is my future we're talking about, my chance to become someone you can be proud of. I thought you'd be happy for me." And there it was, the guilt, the implication that my concern was really just selfishness, fear of losing her rather than genuine worry about her welfare. "Of course I trust you," I said quickly, because what else could I say? "And I'm proud of you no matter what job you have. I just want to make sure you're not being taken advantage of." But even as I said it, I was already reaching for my laptop, already opening the banking website I'd become too familiar with over the past few months. Because she was right. This was her future. And if I really loved her, if I really wanted what was best for her, shouldn't I be willing to help make her dreams come true? "The thing is," she continued, her voice softer now, more vulnerable, "if I don't pay the deposit by Friday, they'll give the position to someone else. There's a whole list of people waiting for this opportunity. I can't lose it, Frank. I can't spend the rest of my life serving drinks to tourists and pretending to smile when they treat me like I'm nothing." The desperation in her voice broke something inside me. I thought about her stories of growing up poor, of watching her mother clean houses for rich families, of dreaming about a different life while she was stuck in a village where the biggest excitement was the weekly market. This job was her ticket out, her chance to become the person she'd always wanted to be. How could I stand in the way of that? "Send me the company information," I said. "Bank details, everything. I'll transfer the money this afternoon." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard her crying, not the manipulative tears I'd seen a few times when she wanted something, but the raw, overwhelming sobs of someone whose last hope had just been answered. "Frank, I don't know what to say. No one has ever believed in me like this. No one has ever been willing to invest in my future like this." She was still crying, but her voice was steady now, certain. "When I'm successful, when I'm making good money in Bangkok, I'll pay you back every baht, with interest. I promise." "You don't need to pay me back," I said, and meant it. "This isn't a loan. This is an investment in us, in our future together." The words came out before I'd really thought them through, but as soon as I said them, I realized they were true. I wasn't just giving her money for a job. I was buying us time, buying her gratitude, buying a future where she would owe me something that couldn't be easily walked away from. "Our future," she repeated, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I love the sound of that. Once I'm settled in Bangkok, once I'm earning money, we can find a place together. Something beautiful with a view of the river. You'll love it there, Frank. It's so different from here. More exciting, more opportunities for both of us. A place together. The promise I'd been waiting to hear for months, finally spoken out loud. All the doubts I'd been harboring, all the small inconsistencies and unexplained absences and moments when she'd seemed to be looking through me rather than at me, none of that mattered anymore. She was talking about our future. She was planning a life that included me. That afternoon, I sat in the internet cafe near the post office and transferred 100,000 baht to the account number she'd given me. It was more money than I'd ever given to anyone at one time, more than I'd spent on my truck, more than I'd paid for some of the houses I'd lived in over the years. But as I watched the confirmation screen load, as I saw my account balance drop by a third, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Relief that I could still be useful to someone. Relief that my money could buy something more valuable than comfort or security. It could buy love, devotion, a future with someone who might not have chosen me otherwise but who was choosing me now, in this moment, when it mattered most. I called her as soon as the transfer went through. "It's done," I said. "The money should be in your account within the hour." She squealed with excitement, a sound so pure and joyful that it erased every reservation I'd had about the decision. "Frank, you're amazing. You're my hero. I can't believe this is really happening." "When do you start?" I asked, already making mental plans. Maybe I could visit her in Bangkok on weekends. Maybe we could explore the city together, find those restaurants and temples and markets she'd told me about. Maybe this was the beginning of something even better than what we'd had in Hua Hin. "Next Monday," she said. "I have to go up this weekend to find an apartment and get everything sorted out. It's going to be crazy, but good crazy. Life-changing crazy." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, more intimate. "Frank, I need you to know that none of this would be possible without you. You've given me everything, not just the money, but the confidence to believe I deserve something better. I love you so much. I love you so much." The words I'd been waiting to hear again, the words that made every sacrifice worth it. "I love you too," I said, "more than you know." And I did love her. Completely, desperately, in a way that made all my previous relationships seem like practice for this moment, this feeling, this absolute certainty that I would do anything to keep her in my life. We talked for another hour about her plans, her excitement, her gratitude. She promised to call every day to keep me updated on her progress, to make sure I knew how much I meant to her even when we were apart. When we finally hung up, I sat in my car outside the internet cafe and felt something I hadn't experienced since I was young, the satisfaction of having changed someone's life for the better. I drove home through the humid afternoon heat, past the resort where she worked, past the restaurant where we'd had our first date, past all the places that had become part of our story. Tomorrow, she would leave for Bangkok, for her new life, for the future we were going to build together. Tonight we would have one last evening in Hua Hin, one last sunset walk on the beach, one last night in my narrow bed before everything changed for the better. At least, that's what I told myself as I pulled into my parking space and climbed the stairs to my empty apartment. That's what I chose to believe as I opened a beer and sat on my balcony, watching the sun sink toward the horizon and waiting for her to call and tell me what time she wanted me to pick her up for dinner. The call never came, but I didn't know that yet. For a few more hours, maybe even a few more days, I was still a man in love with a woman who loved him back. I was still someone whose money had bought him a future worth looking forward to. I was still Frank Morrison, retired truck driver from Montana, living his second chance at happiness in paradise. I just didn't know that paradise was about to end. The silence started on Saturday. No good morning text, no call to tell me what time she wanted me to drive her to the bus station for her trip to Bangkok. I told myself she was busy packing, nervous about the big change, focused on the logistics of starting a new life. I told myself a lot of things that Saturday, sitting by my phone like a teenager waiting for his first girlfriend to call. Sunday came and went the same way. I drove past her apartment building twice, but her motorbike was gone and her windows were dark. I called the resort to ask if she'd picked up her final paycheck, but the person who answered didn't speak enough English to understand what I was asking. By Sunday night, the silence had weight to it, pressing down on my chest like humidity before a storm. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I sent text messages that showed as delivered but never read. I called numbers that rang and rang before going to voicemail boxes that were suddenly full. I checked her Facebook profile obsessively, but there were no new posts, no updates about her exciting new job in Bangkok, no photos of her new apartment or her first day of work. By Thursday, I was starting to panic. By Friday, I was imagining car accidents and family emergencies and all the terrible things that could explain why someone would just vanish from your life without a word. By Saturday, exactly 1 week after I'd transferred 100,000 baht to help her start her new life, I was sitting in my car outside the resort where she used to work, trying to work up the courage to go inside and ask questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. The girl behind the front desk looked like she was maybe 20, with a kind of professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her name tag said Nim in both Thai and English, and when I approached the counter she greeted me with the cheerful courtesy that was probably drilled into every employee from their first day of training. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked in careful English, and I realized I had no idea how to ask what I needed to ask. How do you inquire about someone's whereabouts without sounding like a stalker? How do you explain that the woman you love has disappeared and you need to know if she's safe? "I'm looking for Molly," I said finally. "She used to work here. Concierge, night shift mostly. I'm a friend of hers, and I haven't heard from her in a week. I'm worried something might have happened." The smile on Nim's face shifted slightly, became more cautious, and I could see her trying to decide how much she should tell me. "Molly, no work here anymore," she said, her English becoming more careful. "She quit maybe 2 weeks ago. Say she have new job in Bangkok. 2 weeks ago. That was before she'd even asked me for the money, before she'd told me about getting the position, before I'd transferred enough baht to buy a small car." My stomach dropped, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. "Do you know how to contact her?" I asked. "I have something that belongs to her, something important." It was a lie, but I needed information, and politeness wasn't getting me anywhere. Nim shook her head, but something in her expression suggested she knew more than she was saying. "I don't have her number," she said. "But maybe." She looked around the lobby, checking to see if anyone was listening, then leaned closer to the counter. "You are Mr. Frank, yes? The American man?" The fact that she knew my name should have made me feel better. Instead, it made my skin crawl. How many people at this resort knew about me? What exactly did they know? "Yes, I'm Frank. I said, "How did you?" But she was already talking, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Molly talk about you sometimes. Say you very kind man, very generous. She say you help her family, help her with money problems." The way she said it made it sound like charity rather than love, like I was some benevolent stranger rather than someone who thought he was building a relationship. "Did she say anything else about me?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to know. Nim looked uncomfortable now, like she'd already said too much. She glanced around the lobby again, then back at me. "Sir, maybe you should forget about Molly. Find nice lady your own age. Someone who wants same things you want. Someone my own age." The phrase hit me like a slap. "What do you mean?" I asked, but I could see in her eyes that she was already regretting this conversation. "I just mean, some people, they have different ideas about relationships, different ideas about what love means." She was trying to be kind, trying to let me down easy, but every word was making things worse. "Please," I said, leaning across the counter. "I need to know what happened to her. I need to know if she's safe." Nim looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her options. Finally, she sighed and pulled out her phone. "I show you something," she said, scrolling through what looked like Instagram. "But you must promise not to make trouble, not to tell anyone I show you this." She turned the phone toward me, and my world collapsed. It was a photo of Malay, but not the Malay I knew. This version was wearing expensive clothes, sitting in what looked like an upscale Bangkok restaurant, her arm around the same young Thai man from her birthday photo. The one she'd told me was her cousin. The caption was in Thai, but I could make out enough to understand it was something about being happy, about starting a new life, about love. "This from yesterday," Nim said gently. "She looked happy, yes? She looked like she found what she was looking for." I stared at the photo until my eyes burned, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The man she was with wasn't just someone she was having dinner with. The way they were touching, the way they were looking at each other, this was intimacy. This was love. This was everything I thought I'd had with her. "The man," I said, my voice coming out as barely a croak. "She told me he was her cousin." Nim looked confused for a moment, then something like understanding crossed her face. "Cousin?" she repeated. "No, sir. That her boyfriend. They together maybe 6 months now. He work in Bangkok, good job, good money. She always say she want to move there to be with him. 6 months. We'd been dating for 3 months, which meant she'd been with him for half our entire relationship. The math was simple, brutal, undeniable. I'd never been her boyfriend. I'd never been her future. I'd been something else entirely, something I was only beginning to understand. She used to call you her plan B," Nim continued, apparently deciding that if she was going to destroy my life, she might as well be thorough about it. "She say you nice man, very generous. But if things work out with boyfriend in Bangkok, then—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Plan B. The words echoed in my head like a bell tolling. Plan B. Not the love of her life, not her partner, not even her friend. Just the backup option. The safety net. The lonely American who would pay for her dreams while she waited for her real life to begin. "I'm sorry," Nim said, and she genuinely looked sorry. "I think maybe she not mean to hurt you, but sometimes people, they do what they have to do to survive. You understand?" I understood. Finally, completely, devastatingly, I understood everything. The late-night texts from her boss, the family emergencies that always seemed to require my money, the way she never quite committed to our future, never quite made me feel secure in what we had. I thanked Nim and walked out of the resort on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and tried to process what I'd learned. 100,000 baht. The price of my own stupidity. The cost of believing that someone like her could love someone like me for something other than what I could provide. But the money wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the time, 3 months of believing I mattered to someone, 3 months of feeling alive again, 3 months of planning a future that had never existed outside my own desperate imagination. She'd let me love her, knowing she would never love me back. She'd let me hope, knowing that hope was just another currency she could spend. I drove home through the familiar streets of Hua Hin, past all the places that had seemed meaningful just a week ago. The restaurant where we'd had our first date, the beach where she'd taken my hand, the ATM where I'd withdrawn so much money for so many emergencies that had probably never been real. All of it was still there, but it was empty now. Just geography. Just places where a fool had mistaken loneliness for love and gratitude for affection. Back in my apartment, I poured myself a drink and sat on the balcony watching the sun set over the Gulf of Thailand. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out what came next, how to rebuild a life that had been built on lies. Tonight, I just sat with the knowledge that I'd been her plan B all along. The funny thing was, I wasn't even angry, just tired. Tired and empty and strangely relieved to finally know the truth, even if the truth was that I'd been living in a fantasy for 3 months. At least now I could stop waiting for her to call. At least now I could stop wondering what I'd done wrong. She hadn't disappeared. She just moved on to plan A. I went back to the beach tonight. The same stretch of sand where Molly first took my hand and told me I was different from the others. The same restaurant is still there, with the same tables overlooking the water, the same candles flickering in the warm Thai breeze. But I'm sitting alone now, watching the waves roll in under a sky full of stars I never bothered to notice when I thought I had someone to share them with. 3 weeks have passed since Nim showed me that photo on her phone. 3 weeks since I learned that the woman I thought I loved had been planning her escape from me before I'd even realized I needed to hold on. I should be angry. I should be raging at the injustice of it all, the casual cruelty of using someone's loneliness as a bank account. Instead, I just feel quiet, clear, like I've been walking through fog for months, and it's finally lifting. The silence in my apartment doesn't bother me anymore. It used to feel empty, all those evenings waiting for her to call, wondering if she'd have time to see me, arranging my schedule around the scraps of attention she was willing to throw my way. Now the silence feels honest. It's the sound of a life that belongs entirely to me, with no hidden agendas or ulterior motives echoing through the rooms. I think about the money sometimes. 100,000 bought for a job that probably never existed, plus all the smaller amounts for family emergencies that may or may not have been real. In Montana terms, it's enough to buy a decent used truck. In Thailand terms, it's more than most people make in a year. But I don't feel cheated, exactly. I feel like I paid tuition for a class I needed to take, even if I didn't know I was enrolled. The class was called How to Tell the Difference Between Love and Transaction. The curriculum included lessons on recognizing when someone is interested in your wallet rather than your heart, identifying red flags that aren't actually red when you're wearing rose-colored glasses, and understanding that sometimes the kindest thing someone can do is disappear before you give them everything you have. I passed the course, but the tuition was steep. The old Frank, the one who drove 18-wheelers through blizzards and believed that hard work and decent intentions were enough to earn happiness, that Frank would have spent these 3 weeks planning his revenge. Tracking her down in Bangkok, confronting her boyfriend, demanding his money back, making sure everyone knew what kind of person she really was. But sitting here on this beach, listening to the waves and feeling the warm air on my skin, I realized that revenge would just be another way of staying connected to something that was never real in the first place. She wasn't evil. She wasn't even particularly cruel. She was just a young woman trying to build a better life with the tools she had available, and one of those tools happened to be a lonely American who confused gratitude with affection. In her world, I probably wasn't even a victim. I was just a means to an end, a stepping stone on the path to the life she actually wanted. The truth is, I was never her plan A. I was never even her plan B. I was her safety net, the thing she could fall back on if her real dreams didn't work out. And when they did work out, when her actual boyfriend got that good job in Bangkok and could afford to take care of her properly, the safety net became unnecessary. So she folded it up and put it away, probably without giving it much thought. I used to find that devastating. Now I find it almost liberating, because if I was never really part of her life, then losing her isn't really a loss, it's just a correction. A return to reality after 3 months of living in someone else's story. The waiter from the restaurant comes over to check on me, the same young man who used to serve Malay and me when we'd sit at this very table and plan our imaginary future. He recognizes me, I can tell, but he's too polite to mention that I'm alone now. Instead, he asks if I'd like another beer, if I'm enjoying the evening, if there's anything else he can bring me. Just the check, I tell him, and he nods and disappears back toward the kitchen. I finish my beer slowly, savoring the bitter taste and the weight of the bottle in my hand. Simple pleasures. Real pleasures. The kind that don't require anyone else's participation or approval. Tomorrow, I'm flying back to Montana. Not because I'm running away from Thailand, but because I'm ready to go home, ready to stop trying to be someone I'm not in a place where I don't belong. The cabin in the mountains is still mine, still waiting, still surrounded by the kind of silence that comes from snow and pine trees instead of tropical beaches and tourist crowds. I'll probably sell the place eventually, find somewhere warmer for my retirement years. Maybe Arizona, maybe Florida, maybe just somewhere different enough that I won't spend my time comparing new experiences to old disappointments. But for now, home seems like the right place to be. Home seems like where I need to go to remember who I am when I'm not trying to impress anyone. The check comes, and I pay it with cash Thai baht that I'll have no use for after tomorrow. The waiter thanks me in English, and I thank him back in the few words of Thai I've managed to learn during my time here. It's a small interaction, polite and meaningless, but it feels more honest than most of the conversations I had with Malay. I walk back to my apartment through streets that are busy with night vendors and tourists and young couples holding hands. The couples don't make me jealous anymore. They make me curious. I wonder which ones are real and which ones are transactions disguised as romance. I wonder how many of the older Western men walking with younger Thai women are living the same fantasy I lived, believing in something that exists only in their own desperate imagination. But it's not my problem anymore. Everyone has to learn their own lessons, pay their own tuition, decide for themselves what they're willing to accept in exchange for feeling less alone. My lesson cost me more money than I care to calculate, and 3 months of my life that I'll never get back. But it taught me something valuable. I'd rather be alone and honest than together and deluded. Back in my apartment, I finish packing the few belongings I'll take back to Montana. Most of my things I'm leaving behind: furniture for the next tenant, clothes for charity, books for anyone who wants them. I'm traveling light now, carrying only what I actually need, instead of what I thought I needed to become someone worthy of love. There's a box on my dresser with the ring I bought for Maylee's birthday, the one I never got the chance to give her. The sapphire still catches the light from my bedside lamp, still looks like it could make someone happy. I'll take it back to Montana with me, not as a reminder of what I lost, but as a reminder of what I almost gave away. Maybe someday I'll meet someone who deserves it, someone my own age, with her own life and her own dreams, someone who wants companionship rather than rescue, someone who chooses me because of who I am, not because of what I can provide, or maybe I won't, and that's okay too. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely, and being lonely isn't the same as being worthless. I turn off the lights and lie down in my bed for the last time, listening to the familiar sounds of the Thai night motorbikes and air conditioners and the distant crash of waves against the shore. In 12 hours, I'll be on a plane, and in 24 hours, I'll be back in Montana, back to snow and silence, and a life that belongs entirely to me. I'm not the same man who came to Thailand 8 months ago, running from a divorce and a lifetime of feeling inadequate. That man believed that love was something you could earn through generosity, that loneliness was a problem that could be solved by finding the right person to fix it. This man knows better. This man knows that love is something you choose, not something you buy, and that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. Mali taught me that, even if she didn't mean to, even if she never knew she was teaching me anything at all. For that, I'm almost grateful. Almost. The plane ticket on my nightstand shows a departure time of 2:15 p.m. tomorrow, Gate B7, Seat 23A, destination Helena, Montana, with a connection through Seattle. A one-way ticket because I'm done pretending this was ever going to be a temporary adventure. I came to Thailand looking for something I thought I'd lost in my divorce, the feeling of being wanted, needed, essential to someone else's happiness. What I found instead was the realization that those feelings can't be imported from halfway around the world. They have to be grown at home, in the soil of self-respect and honest self-knowledge. I close my eyes and try to imagine what Frank Morrison's life is going to look like in 6 months. The cabin in the mountains, maybe with a dog this time, something big and loyal and uncomplicated. Long drives on familiar roads, conversations with neighbors who've known me for decades, coffee that tastes like home instead of like trying too hard to be somewhere I don't belong. It sounds peaceful. It sounds real. Maybe I'll take up woodworking again, like I used to do before Linda decided my hobbies were too messy for her idea of how a house should look. Maybe I'll volunteer at the VA, help other guys who came back from their own wars, whether they fought them overseas or just in the wreckage of their marriages. Maybe I'll learn to be the kind of man who doesn't need to be needed, who can offer companionship without desperation, who can love without losing himself in the process. Or maybe I'll just be alone, and maybe that will be enough. Maybe I'll discover that the thing I was looking for in Molly's eyes was never missing in the first place. It was just buried under 43 years of believing other people's opinions of me mattered more than my own. The last thing I do before falling asleep is delete her number from my phone. Not out of anger, but out of mercy. Mercy for both of us. She doesn't need the complication of a broken-hearted American cluttering up her new life, and I don't need the temptation to check up on her progress, to wonder if she ever thinks about me, to hope for an apology that would never come, because she doesn't think she did anything wrong. She probably didn't do anything wrong by the rules of the game she was playing. I just didn't know we were playing different games until it was too late to change the outcome. The number disappears from my contacts list with a soft electronic chime, and with it goes the last official connection between Frank Morrison and the woman who taught him that love isn't something you can purchase with kindness and cash. The lesson was expensive, but it was worth every baht. Because now I know the difference between being someone's choice and being someone's option. Now I know that real love doesn't come with a price tag or a payment plan or a list of emergencies that can only be solved with wire transfers. Real love shows up on time. Real love keeps its promises. Real love doesn't disappear the moment something better comes along. Most importantly, real love starts with loving yourself enough to walk away from anything that asks you to be less than you are. And for the first time in my adult life, I think I might be ready to try that kind of love. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. And if someday never comes, if I spend the rest of my years alone in that cabin in Montana, watching the seasons change through windows that reflect only my own face, well, that won't be settling for less than I deserve. That will be choosing honesty over fantasy, dignity over desperation, peace over the exhausting work of trying to earn someone else's affection. I used to think being alone meant I'd failed at something essential. Now I think being alone might mean I've finally succeeded at the most important thing of all, learning to be enough, all by myself, without anyone else's validation or approval or love to make me feel like I matter. Maybe I was never her plan A, maybe I was never anyone's plan A, but I'll never be someone's backup plan again. That much I promise myself as I drift off to sleep for the last time in this apartment, in this city, in this country where I came looking for love and found something more valuable. The knowledge that I don't need to be rescued and I don't need to rescue anyone else. I just need to be Frank Morrison, retired truck driver from Montana, finally comfortable in his own skin, finally awake after a long, expensive dream. The waves keep crashing outside my window, same as they have every night for the past 8 months. But tonight, they sound different. Tonight they sound like they're washing something clean.